I sold my dignity for rent money, but I didn't expect it to come with a 6-foot-tall problem in a tailored suit. My name is Ethan Cole, and as of exactly 47 minutes ago, I was officially unemployed, unofficially broke, and spiritually one late fee away from crying in a laundromat. The eviction notice on my door wasn't even dramatic about it, just a thin piece of paper taped slightly crooked like it knew I didn't have the energy to fight back. I stood there staring at it, holding a grocery bag with exactly 2 items inside: instant ramen and a questionable energy drink, wondering if this was the moment my life pivoted or just collapsed. Probably collapsed. I let out a laugh that sounded a little too loud in the empty hallway. Okay, I muttered to no one. We're fine. Totally fine. We love character development. The problem was, I didn't actually have a character arc. I had overdue bills, a maxed-out credit card, and a landlord named Greg who texted in all caps like it was a personality trait. I was digging through my pockets for spare change like that was going to magically solve anything when the elevator at the end of the hall dinged. I didn't look up at first. I figured it was another neighbor avoiding eye contact. People get weird when you're the guy getting evicted. But then the air shifted. Not metaphorically. Actually. Like someone had opened a door to a completely different world and forgot to warn the rest of us. I glanced up. Big mistake. He stepped out of the elevator like he owned gravity. Tall. Broad shoulders under a charcoal coat that probably cost more than my entire apartment. Dark hair, perfectly styled in that effortless way that absolutely took effort. And his eyes, sharp, focused, like he was already analyzing everything in front of him and finding it lacking. Including me. Especially me. I straightened instinctively, which was ridiculous because I was holding a plastic bag of ramen like it was a life plan. He walked toward me, each step measured, confident, like the hallway was just another space that existed for his convenience. I told myself not to stare. I stared anyway. Ethan Cole, he said, and his voice, low, calm, precise, hit like a question I wasn't prepared to answer. I blinked. Depends. Am I in trouble, or is this a job offer? He didn't smile. Not even a little. That depends on you. Great. Fantastic. Love that for me. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of everything. My wrinkled hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, the fact that I probably looked like I'd just lost a fight with reality. Which, to be fair, I had. Okay, I said slowly. Mysterious rich guy who knows my name. This is either the start of something amazing or the beginning of a true crime documentary. His gaze flickered, just for a second, like I'd said something mildly unexpected. Not funny, just noted. He stepped closer. Too close. I could smell something clean, subtle, expensive, like cedar and winter air. It shouldn't have mattered. It did. I have a proposition for you, he said. My brain immediately supplied. Illegal. Definitely illegal. I crossed my arms, trying to look less like a human disaster. I feel like I should be concerned. You should be curious, he corrected. That was worse. Way worse. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek black card, holding it between 2 fingers before offering it to me. I hesitated. Because obviously, but also because something about this moment felt off. Like the world had tilted just slightly, and I was the only one who noticed. I took the card. Heavy. Embossed. Of course it was. I glanced down. Sebastian Wolf. CEO. The kind of name that didn't just belong to a person, it belonged to headlines. My stomach did something weird. Okay, I said, looking back up at him. This is officially above my pay grade, which is impressive considering I currently don't have one. He watched me for a beat, unreadable. Then, very simply, he said, I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend. My brain stopped. Completely. Like someone hit pause on my entire existence. I stared at him. He stared back. Silence stretched. I'm sorry, I said finally. Did you just say pretend? Yes. As in fake. Yes. I blinked again. And you're paying me? Yes. I let out a short, breathless laugh, because there were really only 2 options here. I was being pranked, or my life had just taken the weirdest turn imaginable. I looked down at the eviction notice on my door, then back at him, then at the card in my hand. This is a bad idea, I said. He tilted his head slightly. It's a profitable one. I swallowed. Because that was the problem, wasn't it? It was. And for the first time all day, something other than panic curled in my chest. Something dangerous. Something curious. I looked at him again. really looked this time, and thought, not for the last time, this is going to ruin me. I should have walked away. That is the part that keeps replaying in my head, like a warning I chose to ignore on purpose. Instead, I was standing in front of my apartment door, eviction notice still flapping slightly against the wood, holding a business card that probably cost more than everything I owned combined, while a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a financial magazine calmly waited for my answer. "You cannot be serious," I said, but it came out weaker than I intended. Sebastian did not react. Not even a flicker. He just watched me, like he already knew how this would end. I hated that. 6 weeks, he said, like he was discussing a meeting schedule. Public appearances, events, occasional travel. You will be compensated. I let out a breath, running a hand through my hair. You say that like I am applying for an internship. In a way, you are. That almost made me laugh. Almost. I looked down at the card again, then back at him. And what exactly does being your fake boyfriend involve? His gaze held mine, steady, unblinking, standing beside me, letting people believe we are together. Nothing more than what is necessary to maintain credibility. Nothing more. Right. That sounded safe. Controlled. Manageable. I nodded slowly, like I was convincing myself. And what do you get out of this? He paused for half a second. Just enough to register. Stability, he said. Vague. Too vague. I narrowed my eyes. That is not an answer. It is the only one you need. Okay. I definitely should have walked away. Instead, I glanced at the eviction notice again. Then at my phone, where 3 missed calls from my landlord were lighting up the screen like a threat. Then back at Sebastian, who looked like he had never once worried about rent in his entire life. How much? I asked. His answer came immediately. Calm. Precise. A number that made my stomach drop so fast, I actually took a step back. You are kidding. I do not. Joke about contracts. Of course he did not. I pressed my lips together, trying to process it. That amount would cover my rent for months. Maybe a year if I was careful. It would erase the constant background panic I had been living with for so long it felt normal. It would fix everything. Or ruin everything. Probably both. 6 weeks, I repeated quietly. 6 weeks, he confirmed. Silence stretched between us again. My brain was loud. Too loud. This is insane. This is a mistake. This is exactly the kind of thing people regret in documentaries. I looked at him again. Really looked. At the way he stood, perfectly composed, like nothing in the world could knock him off balance. At the sharp line of his jaw. At the way his eyes did not soften, not even a little. And then, before I could stop myself, I said, "And if I say no?" Something shifted. Subtle. Almost invisible. "Then I find someone else," he said. Simple. Final. That should have made the decision easy. It did not. Because for some reason, the idea of someone else standing where I was, taking this deal, stepping into his world, did not sit right. Which was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. I swallowed, gripping the edge of the business card between my fingers. There are rules, I said, because if I was going to make a bad decision, I was at least going to pretend I had control. His gaze sharpened slightly. Interested. Name them. I exhaled slowly. No lying to me about what this is. No surprises. And when the 6 weeks are over, it ends. Clean. His eyes held mine for a long second. Then he nodded once. Agreed. Too easy. That was too easy. And one more thing, I added quickly. I am not changing who I am for this. I am not going to suddenly become whatever it is you are used to. Something almost like amusement flickered in his expression. Barely there. I would not have approached you if I wanted something predictable. That did not help. That actually made it worse. I stared at him, heart beating a little too fast, like it already knew I was about to step into something I could not control. Then, because apparently I had completely lost my mind, I said, "Fine." One word. That was all it took. His hand moved. Before I could second guess it, extending toward me. Then we have an agreement. I looked at his hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. This is where everything changes, I thought. This is where you stop being careful. I reached out. The moment our hands touched, something sharp and unexpected ran through me. Not pain, not even discomfort, just awareness. His grip was firm, steady, grounding in a way that made my thoughts stutter for half a second too long. I pulled my hand back first. Too fast. Okay, I said, clearing my throat like that would reset whatever just happened. So what now? Sebastian watched me, eyes unreadable. Now, he said quietly, you come with me. That should not have made my pulse jump. It did anyway. The car was exactly what I expected, and somehow still worse. Not worse in a bad way. Worse in a this is not my life kind of way. Sleek, black, the kind of car that does not just park outside your building unless something important is happening. Or someone important. I stood there for half a second too long, staring at it like it might disappear if I blinked. You are coming? Sebastian's voice cut through my thoughts. Calm as ever, like this was all completely normal. Right. Of course it was. For him. I adjusted my grip on the plastic grocery bag, still hanging awkwardly from my hand. Instant ramen. Great first impression. Yes, I said, forcing my feet to move. Just mentally preparing to enter a tax bracket I do not belong in. He did not respond. Not surprised. A driver stepped out from the front seat, opening the back door with smooth efficiency, like this was a routine that had never once gone wrong. I hesitated again, because once I got in, that was it. No pause button. No rewind. Just 6 weeks of pretending to be something I was not. Or maybe something I did not even understand yet. I glanced back at my apartment door one last time. The eviction notice was still there, still crooked, still real. Okay. Decision made. I slid into the car. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not just normal quiet. The kind of quiet that felt expensive. The seats were soft, the air cool, everything clean and controlled like it had never experienced chaos a day in its life. Unlike me, Sebastian followed, settling into the seat beside me with the same composed precision he had everywhere else. The door closed. Final. I swallowed. So, I said, because silence was starting to feel dangerous. Is there a manual for this, or do I just improvise and hope for the best? His gaze shifted to me, sharp but not unkind. Just assessing. Always assessing. You will not need to improvise, he said. I will tell you what is expected. Of course he would. That should have been reassuring. It was not. Great, I muttered. Love clear expectations. Huge fan. The car started moving, smooth enough that I barely felt it. I watched the familiar buildings outside blur past, each block putting a little more distance between me and the version of my life I understood. First, Sebastian said, and my attention snapped back to him immediately. You will need to adjust a few things. There it was. I crossed my arms slightly, defensive before I could stop myself. Define adjust. His eyes flicked over me, not judgmental exactly, but precise. Like he was cataloging details. Hoodie, worn jeans, sneakers that had seen better days. Presentation, he said simply. I let out a breath through my nose. I said I was not changing who I am. I am not asking you to, he replied, just as calm. I am asking you to refine how the world sees you. That was annoyingly reasonable. I did not like it. That sounds like a very polished way of saying makeover, I said. Something shifted again. That almost smile, barely there. If that is how you choose to interpret it. I looked away, out the window, trying to ignore the way my pulse had picked up slightly. This was fine. Totally fine. New clothes. New places. Fake boyfriend to a man who probably had a calendar more structured than my entire life. Easy. The car slowed, turning smoothly into a street lined with buildings that looked like they belonged in magazines. Glass, steel, clean lines, everything reflecting sunlight like it had something to prove. We pulled up in front of one of them, taller than the rest. Of course it was. The car stopped. My stomach did something unpleasant. Please tell me this is not where you live, I said, already knowing the answer. It is, Sebastian replied. Of course it was. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. Right. Sure. Why not? The driver opened the door, and suddenly there was no more time to sit and process. I stepped out, the ground feeling just a little less stable than it should have. Sebastian moved beside me, close enough that I could feel the shift in air again, that subtle, controlled presence that made everything else fade a little. Too close. Stay near me, he said, low enough that only I could hear. Not a command. Not quite. But not a suggestion either. My breath caught for half a second. I thought this was fake, I said under my breath. His gaze flickered to mine, something unreadable passing through it. It is, he said. A pause. Just long enough to matter. For everyone else. That did not help. That really did not help. The lobby alone could have paid my rent for a year. That was my first coherent thought as the glass door slid open and I stepped inside beside Sebastian, trying very hard not to look like someone who did not belong here. Everything was polished. Marble floors that reflected light like water, ceilings so high they made you feel smaller just by existing under them, and a quiet kind of movement that suggested everyone here knew exactly where they were going and why. I did not. Not even a little. "Do not stare," Sebastian murmured beside me, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. I blinked, immediately snapping my gaze forward. "I am not staring," I whispered back. "I am observing with enthusiasm." He did not respond, but I caught it this time. That almost smile again, barely there, gone before I could be sure it even happened. We crossed the lobby, and I became painfully aware of the way people looked at him. Not just noticing, not just recognizing. It was different. Heads turned. Conversations paused. A kind of subtle attention that followed him like gravity. And now, apparently me. That part was new. Very new. I shifted slightly closer to him without thinking, like proximity alone might make me blend in better. Bad idea. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His hand moved before I could react, settling lightly at the small of my back. Not pushing. Not guiding exactly. Just there. My entire brain short-circuited for half a second. Too close. Way too close. "Relax," he said quietly, his tone unchanged, like this was just part of the script. Easy for him to say. My shoulders stiffened anyway, hyper-aware of the exact point where his hand rested, the warmth of it even through the fabric of my hoodie. This is fake, I told myself. This is part of the deal. This means nothing. My heartbeat disagreed. We reached the elevator, and the doors opened almost immediately, like they had been waiting for him. Of course they had. We stepped inside, and the space closed around us, smaller now, quieter. The world outside faded into a soft blur of glass and motion. Just the two of us. And his hand still at my back. "You can let go," I said under my breath, trying to sound casual. I failed. Completely. There was the slightest pause. Then his hand shifted, not disappearing, just moving. Sliding from my back to my arm, fingers resting just above my elbow. Less intimate. Still not nothing. "Not yet," he said. My breath caught again. Not helpful. Not helpful at all. The elevator began to rise, smooth and silent, numbers lighting up one by one. I stared at them like they were going to give me answers. They did not. "People are watching," he added after a moment, like that explained everything. Maybe it did. I glanced at the mirrored wall and saw it then. The reflection. Him, perfectly composed, sharp lines and controlled presence. And me, standing just close enough, his hand resting on my arm like it belonged there. Like we belonged there. It looked real. That was the problem. It looked too real. I swallowed, looking away quickly. "You are very committed to this," I muttered. "I do not do anything halfway," he replied. Of course he did not. The elevator slowed, then stopped with a soft chime. The doors opened to a private floor, quiet and immaculate, like the rest of his world had simply continued upward without interruption. He finally let go. The absence of his touch was immediate. Noticeable. Annoying. I stepped forward quickly, pretending that did not just happen. "So," I said, because I needed something normal, something grounded. "What is first on the agenda? Training? Orientation? Do I get a handbook?" He walked past me, heading down the hallway with that same steady confidence. "You get honesty," he said. I frowned slightly, following him. That sounds suspicious. He stopped in front of a door, turning just enough to look at me. "Close again. Too close again. You need to understand something before we go any further," he said, his voice quieter now, more focused. I felt it. The shift. Subtle but real. My pulse picked up. "Okay," I said slowly. "I am listening." His gaze held mine, sharp and steady, like he was measuring how much I could handle. "When we are in public, you are not pretending alone," he said. A pause. Just long enough to matter. "I will make it believable." Something about the way he said that sent a quiet, unexpected tension through my chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something else. Something I did not have a name for yet. I let out a small breath, forcing a half smile. That is reassuring. I think. He studied me for another second, then turned back to the door, unlocking it with a smooth motion. "Come in," he said. I hesitated for just a fraction of a second, because stepping inside felt like crossing another line, one I could not uncross. Then I followed him anyway. Of course I did. The apartment was not an apartment. That was the first problem. It was a space. A concept. A place that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread titled something like, how the other half lives and sleeps on furniture that costs more than your life. I stepped inside slowly, like if I moved too fast I might accidentally break something just by existing. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire living area, the city laid out below like it was part of the decor. Clean lines, neutral tones, everything perfectly placed, like even the air had been arranged with intention. I tightened my grip on the plastic grocery bag still in my hand and immediately regretted bringing it. It felt loud, out of place, embarrassing. "You can put that down," Sebastian said from somewhere behind me. I turned slightly. He had already moved further into the apartment, removing his coat with smooth, practiced motions like he had done this 1,000 times. Of course he had. Right. I muttered, setting the bag carefully on the nearest surface like it might contaminate something if I was not careful. I straightened, glancing around again, trying not to look overwhelmed. Failed again. "So," I said, forcing my voice to stay light. "This is where I am supposed to pretend I belong for 6 weeks. "You will not pretend," he replied. I frowned, turning toward him. "You keep saying that, and I keep not believing you." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer. Not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. My body reacted before my brain could catch up, going still in a way that felt far too aware of the space between us. Too close again. "Stand still," he said quietly. That should not have worked. It did. I froze. Completely. His hand lifted, fingers brushing lightly against the collar of my hoodie. A simple movement. Small. Controlled. And yet my entire focus narrowed to that exact point of contact like everything else had faded out. He adjusted the fabric, smoothing it slightly, his touch precise and careful like he was fixing something that mattered. My breath caught. "Just a little. Posture," he said, almost to himself. His hand shifted, briefly resting against my shoulder before he stepped back again, the contact gone as quickly as it appeared. I blinked, trying to reset my brain. "You could have just said that," I said, my voice coming out a little uneven. "You did not need to." I gestured vaguely in his direction, completely failing to finish that sentence. His gaze held mine, unreadable as always. "You need to get used to it," he said simply. That did not help. That really did not help. I crossed my arms instinctively, like that would somehow ground me again. "Used to what?" "Being seen with me," he replied. A pause. Then, quieter, and being close to me. There it was again. That shift. Subtle. Intentional. I swallowed, looking away for half a second before forcing myself to meet his eyes again. "You are very confident about this whole situation," I said. "I am prepared," he corrected. Of course he was. He always was. I let out a breath, pacing a small circle before stopping again, trying to shake off the strange tension building under my skin. "Okay," I said, more to myself than to him. "Fine. This is fine. We can do this. I can do this." He watched me the entire time. Not interrupting. Not commenting. Just observing. It was unsettling. "There will be an event tomorrow night," he said after a moment. I froze. "Again. Tomorrow." He nodded once. "You will attend with me." Of course I would. Of course this was happening immediately. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. "That seems fast." "It is necessary." I laughed under my breath, the sound slightly breathless. "Right. Of course it is." My eyes drifted back to the windows, the city stretching out below in a way that made everything feel bigger and smaller at the same time. Then I felt it again. That shift in the air. I turned slightly. He was closer. Again. Always closer. His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, then returned to mine, like he was noticing details I did not even realize I was giving away. "You are thinking too much," he said quietly. I huffed a small laugh. "I always think too much. It is kind of my thing." His hand lifted again, slower this time, giving me just enough time to notice before it happened. His fingers brushed lightly along my jaw, not lingering, just enough to tilt my head slightly upward. My breath stopped. Completely. "Then stop," he said, his voice low, steady, too close. I stared at him, heart suddenly doing something unpredictable in my chest. This is fake, I reminded myself. This means nothing. And yet, standing there, with his hand still lightly guiding my focus, it did not feel like nothing. That was the problem. It did not feel like nothing at all. My brain did not recover immediately. That was the problem. 1 second his fingers were lightly against my jaw, guiding my attention like it was the most natural thing in the world, and the next second he had already stepped back, the contact gone, leaving behind something that felt unfinished. I blinked, slower than usual, like my thoughts were catching up a few seconds too late. "You do that a lot," I said, because apparently my mouth still worked even when the rest of me did not. "Do what?" he asked, already turning away slightly, like nothing had just happened. I frowned, trying to put it into words. "That," I said, gesturing vaguely toward him again. "The whole stepping into my personal space like it is not a big deal." He paused. Not long, just enough to acknowledge it. Then he looked back at me, calm, steady. "I get close," he said. That was fair. Annoyingly fair. I crossed my arms again, shifting my weight like that might shake off the lingering awareness still sitting under my skin. "I am not flinching," I said. "I am reacting." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "There is a difference?" I opened my mouth, closed it, thought about it. "Okay, maybe not," I admitted. He nodded once, like that confirmed something for him. "Of course it did. We will fix that," he said. I narrowed my eyes. "We?" "Yes." That should not have sounded like a promise. It did. I exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down my face. "This is already a lot more involved than I expected." "You agreed to the terms," he reminded me. I huffed a quiet laugh. "I agreed to pretend to be your boyfriend." I did not realize that came with training. "Everything comes with preparation," he said simply. Of course it did. I shook my head slightly, pacing a few steps before stopping again near the windows. The city stretched out below, lights beginning to flicker on as evening settled in. Everything moving at a pace that felt completely disconnected from whatever this was. "Okay," I said finally, turning back to him. "Then tell me what you need from me. Specifically." His gaze sharpened slightly, like that was the right question. "Consistency," he said. "You will not hesitate when I touch you. You will not look surprised when I stand close. You will not question it in public." I swallowed, the words settling heavier than they should have. "And in private?" There it was again. That pause. Subtle. Measured. "In private," he said, "you can ask questions." That did not feel like the same answer. Not exactly. I pushed that thought aside before it could spiral into something complicated. "Fine," I said, nodding once. "Consistency. No hesitation. No visible confusion." "Got it. Good." Silence settled between us again, but this time it felt different. Not empty. Charged. Like something was building under the surface, waiting for the next move. I shifted slightly, hyper-aware of the space between us again. Not touching. Not close enough. Not far enough either. "So what now?" I asked, quieter this time. His eyes held mine for a long second, like he was deciding something. Then he moved. Slow. Intentional. Closing the distance between us again, but not as abruptly as before. This time I saw it coming. This time I did not step back. "Progress." His hand lifted, stopping just short of my shoulder for a fraction of a second, like he was giving me a chance to react. I did not. I stayed still, forcing myself to breathe normally, to act like this was nothing. Just part of the role. His fingers settled lightly against my shoulder, steady, grounding. "Better," he said quietly. My heart did something stupid in my chest. I ignored it. "I am learning," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. He did not move away immediately. That was new. The contact lingered, just long enough for me to become aware of it again, of the warmth, the proximity, the way everything else seemed to fade slightly around it. "This is fake," I reminded myself again. This time. "Progress." "Yes," I said. Staring is awkward. Assessing is intentional. His reflection tilted his head slightly, like he was considering that. "Then what is your assessment?" I hesitated. Because the answer was not simple. Because the person in the mirror did not look like the version of me I was used to. Cleaner. Sharper. Like someone who belonged in rooms I had never even stepped into before. "I look different," I said finally. "You look appropriate," he replied. That should have felt neutral. It did not. I turned to face him fully, crossing my arms lightly. That is a very professional way of saying I clean up well. It is an accurate one. There it was again. That almost amusement. Brief. Controlled. I shook my head slightly, trying to ignore the way my pulse had picked up again just from him standing this close. "And you are sure this is going to work?" I asked. Because I still feel like I am one wrong move away from exposing this entire situation. He did not answer right away. Instead, his gaze moved over me again, slower this time, more deliberate, like he was checking details I could not see. Then he stepped forward. "Close again." Always close. His hand lifted, adjusting the collar of my shirt with that same careful precision, fingers brushing lightly against my skin for just a second longer than necessary. My breath caught. Again. You will not make a wrong move, he said quietly, because I will not give you the opportunity to. That should not have been reassuring. It was. A little. That sounds like control, I said, my voice softer than I intended. It is preparation, he corrected. His hand lingered for half a second before dropping, the absence immediate. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay grounded. Right, I muttered. Preparation. Silence settled between us for a moment, but it did not feel empty. It felt focused, like everything was narrowing toward what came next. The event will be crowded, he said. There will be media. My stomach tightened slightly. Of course there will be. They will watch everything. He continued, his tone even, controlled. Every movement. Every reaction. I nodded slowly. No pressure. None, he said, completely serious. That almost made me laugh. Almost. Stay with me, he added. Do not hesitate. I held his gaze, steady this time. I will not. Something shifted in his expression. Small. Almost imperceptible. But it was there. Approval. Or something close to it. Good, he said. Then, without warning, his hand found mine. Not sudden. Knew exactly where I was going even though I absolutely did not. His hand shifted slightly in mine. Not tightening. Not pulling. Just grounding. Like a reminder. I am here. Stay with me. I inhaled slowly, forcing my breathing to steady. You can do this. Just walk. Just breathe. Just do not say anything stupid. We reached the entrance of the venue, and the noise dimmed just slightly as the doors opened, swallowing us into a space that felt just as overwhelming, but in a completely different way. Lights. Music. Conversations layered over each other in a controlled kind of chaos that somehow felt even more intense than the cameras outside. I exhaled quietly, shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Then I realized something. His hand was still holding mine. Still steady. Still there. And I was not pulling away. Not even a little. Good, he said quietly, barely audible over the background noise. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at him. Good, I repeated under my breath. You did not hesitate, he replied. Oh, right. That. I let out a small breath, something between a laugh and a nervous exhale. I was too busy trying not to pass out. That earned me a look. Not disapproving. Not amused exactly. Just aware. You will adjust, he said. Like it was inevitable. Like this was something I would just grow into. I was not sure how I felt about that. Before I could respond, someone approached. Tall. Polished. The kind of person who looked like they belonged here as much as Sebastian did. Unlike me. Sebastian. The man greeted smoothly, his gaze flickering briefly to me before returning. Assessing. Everyone was assessing. I resisted the urge to shift uncomfortably. Good to see you, Sebastian replied, his tone effortlessly controlled. Then, without warning, his hand moved again, not letting go of mine. No. Instead, his other hand came up, resting lightly against my back, drawing me just a fraction closer to his side. My breath caught. Again. Too close. Too natural. Too easy. This is Ethan, he said. Simple. Direct. Final. The man's expression shifted slightly, something like surprise flashing briefly before smoothing out again. I see, he said. I did not miss it. That subtle change. That recognition. This is real now, my brain whispered. This is not just practice anymore. I forced a small smile, hoping it looked natural. Nice to meet you, I said, my voice steady enough to pass. Barely. Sebastian's hand at my back did not move. If anything, his thumb shifted slightly, a small, grounding motion that should not have meant anything. It did. The conversation continued around me, words passing back and forth that I barely registered because my focus had narrowed again. To him. To the way he stood just slightly angled toward me. To the way his presence seemed to create a space where I was not just included, but expected to be. Like I belonged there. That was new. That was dangerous. Stay close, he murmured again, so quietly I almost missed it. I nodded once. Not because he told me to. Because I wanted to. And that was worse. Much worse. Because somewhere between the flashing cameras and the quiet pressure of his hand at my back, something had shifted. This was supposed to be fake. Controlled. Simple. But standing there, surrounded by people who believed every second of it, I realized something I was not ready to admit out loud. I was starting to believe it too. It happened in the smallest moment. That was the thing I did not expect. Not a grand gesture. Not some dramatic scene that everyone would notice. Just a pause. A shift. A look that lasted half a second too long. I was standing beside him, listening to a conversation I barely followed, nodding at the right times, smiling when it felt appropriate, doing everything exactly the way I was supposed to. Consistent. Controlled. Easy. At least on the surface. But underneath, everything felt sharper. Louder. Every movement more deliberate. Every touch more noticeable. His hand was still at my back. It had not moved since we entered the room. Not once. At first, it had been grounding. A reminder. Now it felt like something else. Something I was trying very hard not to think about. "You are quiet," the man in front of us said suddenly, his attention shifting to me. I blinked, refocusing instantly. "Just taking everything in," I replied, keeping my voice light. "It is a lot." He smiled, polite but curious. "First time at one of these?" I could feel it. The question behind the question. "Who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here with him?" My brain scrambled for an answer, something that sounded natural, something that fit the version of me I was supposed to be. But before I could say anything, Sebastian moved. Subtle. Smooth. His hand at my back shifted slightly, fingers pressing just a little more firmly, guiding me closer to his side. My shoulder brushed his. My breath caught. "Ethan prefers smaller gatherings," he said calmly, answering for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "This is new for him." The man nodded, satisfied with that. Conversation redirected. Pressure gone. Just like that. I exhaled slowly, my body relaxing a fraction without my permission. He had stepped in. Effortlessly. Without hesitation. Without asking. That was part of the role, I told myself. Of course it was. That is what he said he would do. Make it believable. But it did not feel like performance. That was the problem. It felt instinctive. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at him. He was already watching me. Of course he was. Always aware. Always paying attention. "You are thinking again," he murmured, so quietly I almost missed it. I huffed a small breath, barely a laugh. "You say that like it is a problem." "It is," he said. Simple. Direct. My eyes narrowed slightly. "And what exactly am I supposed to do instead?" There was a pause. Then his hand moved again. Not away. Never away. Just adjusting, sliding slightly higher along my back, closer to my shoulder, his thumb brushing lightly against the fabric of my jacket in a slow, absent motion that felt anything but absent. My entire focus snapped to it. To him. To the space between us that did not exist anymore. "Stay present," he said quietly. I swallowed. Because suddenly, that felt a lot harder than it should have been. The conversation around us continued, voices blending into background noise, but I was not listening anymore. I was aware of him. Only him. The warmth of his hand. The steady presence at my side. The way he stood just slightly angled toward me, like I was part of his space now. Not separate. Not temporary. Part of it. "Sebastian." Another voice cut in, pulling his attention away for a moment. I exhaled, the shift immediate, like the pressure had lifted just enough for me to breathe again. He turned slightly, responding, his tone returning to that controlled, composed rhythm I was starting to recognize. But his hand did not move. Not even a fraction. It stayed right where it was, like letting go had never been an option. I glanced down briefly, then back up, trying to ignore the way that small detail affected me more than it should have. "This is fake," I reminded myself again. "This is a role. This is temporary." But then his thumb moved again. A small, unconscious shift. And my brain betrayed me with a thought I did not want to have. If this is fake, why does it feel like he is not pretending at all? It was the interruption that broke it. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a shift in tone that cut clean through everything else. "I was not aware you had moved on so quickly." The voice came from behind us, smooth but edged, like it was carefully controlled and still sharp enough to leave a mark. Sebastian's hand stilled against my back. Not pulling away. Not tightening. Just still. That was how I knew it mattered. He turned slowly, his posture unchanged, but something in the air shifted with him. I followed his movement, my attention catching on the man approaching us. Well-dressed. Confident. Too confident. The kind of presence that did not ask for attention but expected it anyway. His gaze flicked to me first. Not curious. Not polite. Assessing. Measuring. Then back to Sebastian. Daniel, Sebastian said, his tone even, but lower now, more deliberate. Recognition clicked. Not a stranger. Not just another face in the room. Something else. Something with history. Great. That was exactly what I needed. More complications. You did not mention this, Daniel continued, his eyes sliding back to me, lingering just long enough to feel intentional. I resisted the urge to shift under that look. Barely. It is recent, Sebastian replied. Simple. Controlled. Final. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Not surprise. Something closer to disbelief. I see, he said again, but this time it sounded different. Less neutral. More pointed. Silence stretched for half a second too long. I could feel it building. The tension. The unspoken questions. The weight of something I was not part of, but suddenly standing in the middle of. Sebastian's hand moved then. Subtle. Deliberate. Sliding slightly higher along my back. Drawing me closer again, more firmly this time. Not just presence. Not just grounding. Claim. My breath caught. Again. Ethan, Sebastian said, his voice quieter now, directed at me. Not an introduction. Not a correction. Just my name. But it landed differently this time. Like a cue. Like a reminder. I looked at him. Just for a second. And something in his expression shifted. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Stay with me. I swallowed. Then turned back to Daniel, forcing my posture to relax, to look like I belonged exactly where I was. Like this was natural. Like this was real. Nice to meet you, I said, steady enough to pass. Daniel's gaze lingered on me again, sharper this time, like he was trying to see through something. Likewise, he replied, though it did not sound entirely convincing. His attention shifted back to Sebastian. You have always had interesting timing. There it was. Not subtle. Not hidden. Whatever this was, it was not just casual conversation. Sebastian did not react. Not visibly. I do not base my decisions on timing, he said calmly. Daniel smiled slightly, but it did not reach his eyes. No, he agreed. You never do. Another pause. He stepped a fraction closer. Not enough to invade. Just enough to challenge. I hope you know what you were doing. The words were directed at Sebastian. But something about the way he glanced at me again made it clear I was part of that statement too. My pulse picked up, but I kept my expression neutral, steady, exactly the way I had practiced for the last, 24 hours? That was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. And yet here I was, standing in a room full of people who believed every second of this, holding my place like I had been doing it for years. Sebastian's hand pressed slightly more firmly against my back. A warning. Or reassurance. Maybe both. I always do, he replied. Quiet. Final. Daniel held his gaze for a long second, then nodded once, like he had made a decision I was not aware of. We will see, he said. Then he stepped back, the tension easing just enough for the air to feel normal again. Conversation resumed around us, voices filling the space, but it all felt distant, muted, like I was hearing it from underwater. Because my focus was still locked on one thing. The way Sebastian's hand had not moved. Not even once. Not during any of that. Not when it would have been easier to let go. I glanced at him again, slower this time. Careful. He was already looking at me. Of course he was. Always aware. Always watching. You did well, he said quietly. That should not have mattered. It did. I let out a small breath, something steady returning to my chest. That did not feel like practice, I admitted. His gaze did not waver. It was not. My heart skipped. Just once. Sharp. Unexpected. Then what was it? I asked softer now. There was a pause. A real one this time. His thumb moved again, a small, absent motion that grounded me in a way I was starting to recognize. Reality, he said. And for the first time since this started, I did not know how to separate the role from the truth anymore. The word lingered longer than it should have. Reality. It echoed in my head, quiet but persistent. Like it was testing the edges of something I had not fully understood yet. I swallowed, looking away for a second, trying to reset, to put things back into categories that made sense. Fake. Real. Contract. Boundaries. Simple. Except nothing about this felt simple anymore. That is a bold claim, I said, keeping my tone light, even though my chest felt tight in a way I did not want to examine too closely. His hand was still there. Of course it was. Steady. Unmoving. Like it had decided that was where it belonged. It is accurate, he replied. Always precise. Always certain. I huffed a quiet breath, shaking my head slightly. You say things like that like they are not complicated. They are not, he said. I glanced at him again, my eyes narrowing just a fraction. They are for me. That earned me a pause. A real one. His gaze shifted, not away, but deeper somehow, like he was actually considering that instead of dismissing it. That was new. Then ask, he said quietly. The simplicity of it caught me off guard. Ask, I repeated. In private, he reminded me. Right. That rule. The one I had almost forgotten about until now. I hesitated. Because the question sitting at the front of my mind was not simple. Not safe. And definitely not part of any contract I had agreed to. But it was there anyway. Persistent. Impossible to ignore. That. Man. I started, keeping my voice low, careful. Daniel. His name felt deliberate when I said it. Like it carried weight I did not fully understand yet. Sebastian's expression did not change. Not visibly. But his hand shifted slightly against my back. A small movement that felt more intentional than before. What about him, he asked. Neutral. Too neutral. I exhaled slowly. He did not seem like just another guest. Understatement of the year. He is not, Sebastian said. Of course he was not. That would have been too easy. I waited. Because something told me if I pushed, he would answer. Not everything. But something. He is familiar with my personal decisions, he added after a moment. That was vague. Painfully vague. That sounds like a very polite way of saying he used to be one of them, I said. His gaze sharpened slightly. There it was. Not denial. Not confirmation. Just acknowledgement. He is aware of patterns, Sebastian corrected. That was not better. That was worse. I let out a quiet breath, looking away again, trying to process that without letting it show on my face. Patterns. That implied history. Repetition. Something that made this whole situation feel less unique than I wanted it to be. That thought settled uncomfortably in my chest. And this, I said, gesturing faintly between us, careful not to move too much. Is that part of the pattern? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Too honest. Too direct. His hand stilled again. Completely. Silence followed. Not empty this time. Heavy. Measured. I held my breath without realizing it. Waiting. For what? I was not entirely sure. His answer came slower than usual. No, he said. Simple. But not dismissive. My eyes lifted to his again, searching for something in his expression that would tell me if that was true. If this was different. If I was different. That was a dangerous line of thinking. I knew it. And yet I could not stop. Then what is this? I asked softer now. Not just about Daniel. Not just about the past. About everything. About the way his hand had not left my side since we walked into this room. About the way he stepped in without hesitation. About the way it felt like he was not pretending at all. Another pause. Longer this time. His thumb moved again, that small, grounding motion that was starting to feel like a language I did not fully understand yet. It is exactly what you agreed to, he said. That should have been enough. It should have closed the conversation. It did not. Because the way he said it did not feel like a deflection. It felt like something held back. Something just under the surface. I nodded slowly, even though it did not fully answer the question I had asked. Right, I murmured. Of course it is. But as I stood there, still within the quiet space he had created around me, I realized something I could not ignore anymore. I was not just asking about him. I was asking about myself. About why I was still standing here. Why I had not stepped back. Why I had not drawn a line when I had the chance. And the answer to that was a lot less controlled than anything he had said so far. Because somewhere between the contract and the reality he had claimed, I had crossed a line too. I just did not know how far yet. The noise of the room came back all at once. That was the strange part. 1 second everything had narrowed down to just him, his voice, the quiet weight of his hand against my back, and the next second the world rushed in again like it had been waiting for permission. Conversations overlapped. Glasses clinked softly somewhere nearby. Laughter drifted through the air, light and effortless, completely disconnected from the tension that still sat heavy in my chest. I exhaled slowly, forcing my focus outward, away from the questions I had just asked, away from the answers I had not really gotten. You are overthinking again, Sebastian murmured beside me, his tone low but certain, like he could read the shift in my breathing without even looking. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head slightly. You say that like I have a choice. You do, he replied. Of course he would say that. I glanced at him, just briefly, catching the way his attention had already shifted back to the room, to the people, to the event that he navigated so easily, it almost looked effortless. Almost. His hand was still there. That had not changed. It had not changed at all. I swallowed, trying to ignore the way that detail grounded me, more than anything else in this entire space. Then tell me what to focus on, I said, quieter this time. His gaze flicked to me for half a second. Enough to register. Enough to answer. Me, he said simply. My breath caught. Again. I looked away quickly, pretending to scan the room, pretending that word did not land heavier than it should have. Focus on him. That sounded simple. It was not, because focusing on him meant noticing things I was not supposed to notice. The way his posture shifted slightly when someone approached, just enough to place himself between me and them without making it obvious. The way his hand adjusted when I moved, always maintaining contact like it was intentional, like it mattered. The way his voice dropped just a fraction when he spoke to me compared to everyone else. None of that was part of a contract. None of that felt like performance. You are doing it again, he said quietly. I blinked, realizing I had been staring. Not observing. Definitely staring. I am focusing, I corrected, even though my voice sounded a little less steady than before. His lips almost curved. Almost. Then you are learning. That should not have felt like approval. It did. The conversation around us shifted again, someone else stepping in, drawing his attention away for a moment. I took the opportunity to breathe, to reset, to remind myself of the rules I had agreed to. 6 weeks. A role. Nothing more. Nothing real. Easy. Except it was not easy anymore. Not when every small detail felt amplified. Not when I was starting to notice the spaces between his words more than the words themselves. Not when I was standing this close, and it felt natural. Too natural. Ethan. My name again. Quiet. Grounding. I turned immediately, my focus snapping back to him without hesitation this time. Progress. Or something like it. His gaze held mine for a second longer than necessary, like he was checking something. Measuring. Deciding. Then his hand moved. Not away. Never away. It slid slightly, fingers brushing along my side as he shifted closer, closing the last inch of space between us. My breath caught again, sharper this time. Too close. Too real. Stay with me, he said softly. I nodded once. No hesitation. No second thought. Just yes. Because at some point between the contract and whatever this had become, staying beside him had stopped feeling like part of the job. It felt like the only place I was supposed to be. And that realization hit harder than anything else so far. Because it meant something had already changed. Something I could not take back. His thumb moved again. That small, familiar motion, grounding and steady and entirely too easy to get used to. I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay even. I am here, I said. He held my gaze for a second longer, something unreadable flickering beneath the surface of his usual control. Then, quieter, almost like it was meant only for me, he said, I know. And for the first time since this started, it did not feel like reassurance. It felt like something else entirely. Something deeper. Something I was not ready to understand yet, but could not ignore anymore. The night should have ended there. That was what I told myself as the event slowly unraveled into smaller conversations, quieter corners, softer lights. People drifted away, attention shifting, the intensity of the room easing just enough to breathe again. It should have felt like relief. It did not. Because his hand was still there. Still steady. Still grounding in a way I was no longer trying to ignore. We moved through the space together, slower now, less watched, but not unnoticed. I could feel it. The looks. The curiosity. The quiet speculation that followed us even when no one said anything out loud. And somehow, that made everything feel more real instead of less. You did not pull away, he said quietly as we paused near the edge of the room, his voice low, meant only for me. I let out a small breath, glancing at him briefly. I told you I would not hesitate. His gaze held mine for a second longer than necessary. You did not. That should have been the end of it. A simple acknowledgement. But the way he said it made it feel like something else. Like it mattered more than it should have. I shifted slightly, becoming aware again of how close we were standing. Not forced. Not staged. Just natural. Too natural. This was supposed to be practice. I said, my voice quieter now, more honest than I intended. It does not feel like that anymore. He did not respond immediately. Of course he did not. He never rushed answers. never gave more than he intended to. I watched him, waiting, even though I was not sure what I expected him to say. His hand moved then. Not away. Never away. It slid slightly, fingers tracing a slow, deliberate path along my side before settling again at my back. Closer this time, more certain. My breath caught. Again. Always again. It stopped being practice the moment we walked in, he said finally. His voice was softer now. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I swallowed, trying to process that, trying to place it somewhere that made sense. It did not fit anywhere. That was the problem. Then what is it now? I asked, barely above a whisper. His gaze did not waver. Not even slightly. It is what they see, he said. That was not an answer. Not really. And what do you see? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Too direct. Too honest. Too much. Silence followed. Real silence this time. The kind that felt like it held weight instead of just filling space. His thumb moved again, that small, familiar motion, grounding and steady and entirely too easy to recognize now. I see you, he said quietly. My heart stopped. Just for a second. Long enough to matter. I stared at him, searching for something in his expression that would tell me if that was part of the role, part of the performance, part of the careful control he had maintained since the moment I met him. But there was something else there now. Something I had not seen before. Something that did not feel rehearsed. My chest tightened. That is not part of the agreement, I said, my voice softer than I intended. No, he agreed. Simple. No hesitation. No correction. That should have been the moment I stepped back. The moment I remembered exactly what this was supposed to be. Temporary. Controlled. Safe. But I did not move. Not even an inch. Because the truth was, I did not want to. And that realization settled deeper than anything else that had happened tonight. I exhaled slowly, my thoughts quieter now, clearer in a way that felt more dangerous than the confusion before. Then we have a problem, I said. His gaze sharpened slightly. Do we? I held his eyes, steady this time. No hesitation, no second. Guessing. Yes, I said quietly. Because if this is still fake. I paused, the words catching for half a second before I forced them out anyway. Then why does it feel like I am the only one trying to remember that? Silence followed. Not empty. Not uncertain. Just waiting. And for the first time since this started, I realized something I could not ignore anymore. I did not know where the role ended. I did not know where the truth began. And somehow, that mattered less than the fact that I did not want it to end at all.